And we continue at 1:05 in the afternoon on the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wang has the day off. He'll be back with us next week. 800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is an American filmmaker who has a new film out about Roseanne Barr. It's titled Roseanne is America. You can get it online at roseanneisamerica.com, and you can follow him on X at Joel Gilbert. Joel Gilbert, welcome.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for stopping by. And I've got to tell you, I'm so happy that you made this film about Roseanne Barr, because it feels like in this world when everything changes at a moment's notice and news cycles don't last for a long time, when some huge wrong happens, it's easy to forget about it and move on and not even really remember the details associated with a miscarriage of justice that took place. So I think it's important for people who are writers, it's important for people who are filmmakers to go back and to take those moments and just remind us of exactly what happened so that we prevent things like that from happening again in the future.
Well, Roseanne, you might remember, was kind of the first big victim of the cancel culture, where if you said one thing wrong, you would have your whole life, destroyed and canceled. No one ever wanted to talk to you again. So she was the first big victim in 2018. And what led up to that, we covered this in the film. She actually goes through her whole life story, how she grew up as an Orthodox Jewish girl in Salt Lake City, Utah, how she came to Hollywood, immediately got on the Johnny Carson show. A couple of years later, she had her TV show, #1 comedy in America, The Roseanne Show, for many years in the 90s. And she talks about her whole life history, and she becomes actually a socialist presidential candidate in 2012. And then by 2016, she had a political awakening, and she became a Donald Trump supporter and a big MAGA person. 2018, 2 years later, they decided to resurrect The Roseanne Show from 20 years earlier. They put it on TV. It's #1 again on ABC. And Roseanne is playing a Trump supporter on her TV show, the same as she is in real life. And people might remember what happened is she made a very funny political tweet. She said, if the Muslim Brotherhood and the Planet of the Apes movie had a child, it would be VJ, meaning Valerie Jarrett, because the Planet of the Apes movie is about taking over the world. And 20 minutes later, they said, oh, Roseanne, did you know that Valerie Jarrett was 10% black? And she said, no, she's born in Iran. People knew that Valerie Jarrett was born in Iran, so it was a joke about the Iranian regime. And within an hour, they canceled her show, and they canceled her out of Hollywood, even though she was a lifelong civil rights activist, alleging she was being racist because of Valerie Jarrett being 10% black that nobody even knew about. So she was a victim at the time because the media and the Democrats were trying to make the case that all Trump supporters were racist. That was their thing. If you support Trump, you must be racist. So they canceled her out of Hollywood. Roseanne tells the whole story about how unjust that was and how ridiculous it was to accuse her of racism based on a comedic tweet that she didn't understand, and how she's kind of come back since then. So if you go to roseanneisamerica.com, roseanneisamerica.com, you can watch the movie trailer, and that'll link you up where to watch the movie. It's live streaming, everywhere: Roku, Tubi TV, Apple TV, just about everywhere you can think of. YouTube Movies, Amazon Prime.
What's wild to me is typically the way Hollywood works is the same way that any business works, which is if you can put butts in seats, if you can sell tickets, if you can generate an audience, they'll put up with just about whatever bad behavior you're willing to throw at them, whether it's drug addiction or treating people poorly. We saw that with that big expose on Ellen DeGeneres, how I guess she was just a complete monster to her staff. And everyone knew it, but they were willing to put up with it because she did well in the ratings, and they didn't want to get rid of that revenue. If you want the ratings, you want the money, you have to put up with Ellen and all the monster behavior. The one thing they're not willing to put up with, though, is politics that veer from where you're supposed to be or veer from where Hollywood is. And that's what Roseanne did. And that sin was worse than any drug addiction, was worse than any sexual harassment, was worse than treating people poorly because she didn't agree with their politics. She had a target on the back of her head. And I really do think that she had that target on her head from day one after she made the conversion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Roseanne says that even though it was the number one show with 28 million viewers, and they could brag about it and say, hey, look at all the products we can sell compared to our rivals only have 7 million viewers. But ABC really didn't like the show. One of her writers, Wanda Sykes, complained that Roseanne was humanizing Trump supporters by being a Trump supporter on the show. So you're right. ABC, despite the financial success, was very quickly willing to cancel the show. And the hypocrisy was ridiculous because people like Samantha Bee said these vile things on the air, and she was quickly forgiven. Whoopi Goldberg said vile anti-Semitic things on the air, and she was allowed to simply apologize. But for on the right, if you're conservative, Roseanne was there was no forgiveness. It didn't matter that your whole life you were a civil rights activist. They just said, oh, well, you must be racist, and you meant something racist by making a joke about Iran in this movie because you didn't know that Valerie Jarrett, who is from Iran, was actually 10% black. That's how ridiculous it was.
When you talked to her about it, and I'm sure there had to be extensive interviews on this topic for the documentary, I would imagine that the hurt that she experienced, not just from having the show taken away from her, which was her baby, which was something that was based on her stand-up comedy act going all the way back to the 1980s, the domestic goddess and that whole situation. But a lot of these people who became famous because of Roseanne, because she cast them on this program, because she went to bat for them to the network, whatever the case may be, they turned on her. And a lot of people whose careers exist because of Roseanne Barr didn't hesitate to just go ahead and stick the knife in when she was in a vulnerable state. When you talk to her about being canceled, as she was, although she's just as successful now as she ever was, she's just doing it on her own. But when you talk to her about that whole process of being canceled, was the hurt palpable?
Look, she talked about how painful it was that people on her show, like Sarah Gilbert, came out and said they supported ABC canceling Roseanne. And Sarah Gilbert actually called Roseanne a cast member as if she was just another cast member when it was her show. Other people like John Goodman simply said, well, I don't want to have any comment. Now, Roseanne didn't blame people for, not putting themselves at risk, but the ones that actually came out and condemned her for being racist when all she did is make a very funny tweet that the worst thing anybody should have done to her is say, Roseanne, did you know you had a misunderstanding? And she would have said, and she did apologize. She said, I'm sorry, I didn't know that Valerie Jarrett was black, and somebody's going to say the Planet of the Apes movie had something to do with black people because Valerie Jarrett, even though she's from Iran, it was just ridiculous. But the people that actually came out and supported Roseanne at that time were black actors. People like Monique and others would say, no, she's not racist. That's ridiculous. So it was just the height of the cancel culture. Roseanne was really the first big victim. And it was all for politics because they wanted to prove that Trump supporters were racist. That was their thing. And that's where the cancel culture really got bad.
Do you think a show like that could ever go back on network TV, or do you think we're just past that at this point, where at some point there would be a protest, at some point there would be a boycott, at some point they would demand to scalp the protesters, the Antifa, whomever, and the networks just aren't equipped to stand up to them?
Yeah, they can't really stand up to it. The left and the media have pretty much said that anybody that supports conservative values is hate speech. That's why, Charlie Kirk, he would just talk about conservative values, America first, why we want to have a great economy, and people would protest, and he was assassinated over hate speech. So they have characterized anything to do with conservative mainstream America as hate. And the networks are just terrified that anyone who's protesting will go after their advertisers or attack them on social media. They're absolutely terrified. So I think the left has succeeded in making network television boring. and that's why it's boring.
As a filmmaker, were you worried about making a film like this because of the backlash that you know that Roseanne received and that you could potentially receive yourself for not going along with the company line, for being critical of the way they handled this situation and showing all of the errors that they made along the way? Certainly, it's not a good look for ABC Network. It's not a good look for the Walt Disney Company, but it's not a good look for Hollywood in general.
Yeah, no, look, I've made a number of conservative films over the years. I'm kind of the conservative Michael Moore. I've made films about Barack Obama and socialism, a movie called Trump, the Art of the Insult, the Trayvon hoax about the Trayvon Martin case. So I wasn't afraid of any bad feedback. We spend 90 minutes in this movie. Roseanne tells the whole story, and you really get to understand it, something that she really didn't have a chance to do in the past. So anybody that watches the film just falls in love with Roseanne all over again. She's just so funny, she's hilarious, and it's just so interesting. Everybody that watches it says, I watched it 2 more times because there was so much information. So I think it's just a fantastic movie.
I got a chance to meet her a couple of times and interact with her a couple of times before she made the sitcom the second time, in between the first sitcom and the second sitcom. And I've always been a fan of her comedy. I always liked the show when that was on television, and I've been a longtime fan of her stand-up act. But what you just described is exactly how I felt. What was surprising is how down to earth she was and how genuinely, I'm not going to say empathetic, but it's just like having an aunt in your family in the room. I mean, she was genuinely that person. And the likability that just came off of her was so opposite of everything that you read in the tabloids, of everything that you've heard associated with her throughout her time as a public person. But I didn't get the impression that she was acting. I didn't get the impression that she was putting me on. It just seemed like she was very natural, and that's who she was.
Well, that's the very reason that her show did so well in the 90s, because above everything else, she's very authentic. She's a real person, and people relate to her. And she comes off not as one of these kind of phonies, and she put on a TV show that was kind of anti-television. It was showing a regular family and regular people and how people really behave, and that's who she's always been. And when you watch this movie, you'll see that it's just such a fascinating story of how she grew up with her Lithuanian grandmother and all the things she went through, getting out of Salt Lake City, going to Hollywood, being on the Carson show, fighting the writers on her TV show. The whole time she was on her comedy show, she had to fight off the Hollywood writers who were kind of racist and sexist and had to kind of push through all these interesting storylines that she knew people wanted to hear. So she's still that person today. She's still doing her podcast. And this movie, Roseanne Barr is America, is I think, just the funniest, most interesting film you can watch today.
The film is Roseanne is America. You can get it online at roseanneIsAmerica.com. We're speaking with Joel Gilbert, who is the filmmaker behind that picture. You can follow him on X at Joel Gilbert. Joel, you have a piece out about Congressman Eric Swalwell, who is running for governor here in California, a guy who's never really spent much time expressing interest in California issues. I can't even tell you how he comes down on the bullet train or on the insurance crisis or what to do to mitigate fire risk here in California, homelessness, crime, you name it. I can't tell you what his position was on Prop 36, for example, which we all voted on in the last cycle. But all of a sudden, he has decided that he wants to be governor of California. To my eye, he's doing it because I think it will, in his opinion, elevate his celebrity so he can be someone who can appear on the late night programs, which we know he likes to do more often, get booked on cable news. He seems to be in it for those reasons. You have a piece out saying that he may not even be eligible to be governor of the state of California, let alone interested in the subject matter.
Yeah, look, Swalwell, don't forget, he's got big visions of grandeur. He ran for president a few years ago with not really telling anybody why he was running for president, just to kind of get his name out there. He's kind of tried to establish himself as this big moral authority, a big anti-Trump person. He's still suing Trump for democracy and all this stuff. So I wasn't surprised when he said he wanted to run for governor. What is surprising is he didn't do his homework because I believe, and I wrote about in the Gateway Pundit today, that he is constitutionally disqualified and cannot run for governor. And the reason for that is there are very strict laws in the state of California that say when you run for governor, you have to live in the state for 5 years before the election, and your primary residence has to be in California. Now, Swalwell's been a congressman, and let's contrast what he does in D.C. with Maxine Waters, of all people. Maxine Waters owns a home in Los Angeles, and on her mortgage application and her mortgage document for her condo in Washington, D.C., she calls it a second home, and she pays higher interest rates. Okay, that's legal. She did it correctly. She could run for governor of California. Swalwell does not have any home in California whatsoever, and his Washington, D.C. house, in the mortgage document, he said it would be his primary residence, and he gets very low, the lowest interest rates possible, because that's his primary residence. So that's his domicile. He does not have 5 years of continuous residency in the state of California. He's in his own mortgage documents disqualify him from running for governor. So I'm actually filling out a complaint right now to the state of California election board and Secretary of State, asking that he be disqualified because he is not qualified based on his primary residency in Washington, D.C.
What's wild to me is that residency issues, it's like calling holding in the NFL. You could pretty much do it on every play if you want to. They just pick and choose when they do it. For example, LaFonza Butler, who was a U.S. Senator that was appointed by Gavin Newsom, was living in Maryland at the time that she was appointed, clearly not a California resident. They allowed that to go through. Adam Schiff allegedly has declared on bank documents that his primary residence is in the state of Maryland, where he owns a spacious home and his kids went to school. Yet he has a tiny little condo in Burbank, and I guess for the purposes of the election, says that he lives there, and they're fine. They haven't been charged with anything, I guess, up until the most recent Trump Department of Justice in the case of Schiff, not in the case of Butler. But then you have people at the local level, people like Rod Wright, a longtime local elected who was a state senator, who actually was convicted and did some time in jail over false residency claims that he made. The same thing is true with Richard Alarcon, who was a member of the city council, a member of the state legislature. He got popped for it as well. Some people get popped, some people don't. It makes no sense to me.
Well, in Swalwell's case, he's got it much worse because he has no residence in California at all. He never did. And I think the reason is another article I did showing that his finances are a total mess. If you look at his disclosures when he's running for Congress between 2011 all the way up to 2024, he has not paid off his student loans at all. He still owes over $100,000 on student loans. He also owes $100,000 in credit card debt from 2011. He's never paid it down. So something's wrong with this guy. He's been making $174,000 a year as a congressman, but he can never pay off any loans. So I think that's why he can't afford to have a home in California and why he had to get the lowest interest rate possible by telling the bank it would be his primary residence living in D.C. So there's no way he can get out of it. He gets disqualified. He's not going to go to jail for it, but the Secretary of State has plenty of time to disqualify him based on the fact he did not have a primary residence in California for the past 5 years as required.
Has he responded to this allegation at all publicly?
We haven't heard from him. I mean, the article came out today. It's been up on Gateway Pundit. It's gotten a tremendous amount of publicity. I'm sending in a complaint tomorrow to the Secretary of State of California I got an election voter complaint form right here, and I'm sending in all the data. I'm sending in a copy of his deed of trust in Washington showing that that is his primary domicile and showing that the California law explicitly says you have to be domiciled in California for 5 straight years. So let's see what happens. It might take a rival of Swalwell in the governor's race on the Democrat or Republican side to challenge it, but we can hope that the Secretary of State will do the right thing and simply disqualify him.
Joel Gilbert, you can find his film online at roseanneisamerica.com, and you can follow him on X at Joel Gilbert. Joel, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks so much.
It's the John Phillips Show. It's the John Phillips Show. 800-222-5222 is the telephone number. 1-800-222-5222. Well, our last guest referenced the candidacy of California Congressman Eric Swalwell, who now says he's running for governor here in the Golden State. And he's doing the interview rounds where he's talking to all the channels, telling them why he should be the next chief executive officer of the state of California. And in one of the stops, he sat down with CNN's Alex Michelson, friend of the show. And while he was doing his sit-down interview with Alex Michelson, he dropped this bomb. He said, quote, "I want us to be able to vote by phone," end quote. When Michelson expressed surprise at Swalwell's statement, he said, quote, "Yeah, if we can do our taxes, make our healthcare appointments, essentially do your banking online, you should be able to vote by phone. Make it safe, make it secure, but it's actually already happening all over the United States." He said his goal is for California to do more than just a little better than red states when it comes to voting. Quote, "I want us to max out democracy. Also, as it relates to democracy, if you wait in line for 30 minutes or more, if you do want to vote in person, I think you should fine every county for every minute that a person has to wait longer," Swalwell said. He added that he hopes to modernize the California Department of Motor Vehicles so that people will no longer have to show up in person for visits. Fox News Digital reached out to Swalwell's office and campaigned for additional comment, and they have yet to hear back. So voting over your phone is what he wants to be the law of the land in the state of California. All right, let's break this down. This is a dumb idea for a million different reasons. We don't have time to get into all of those reasons because I'm only here until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So let's just take a couple of them. First and foremost, whenever you need your cell phone to work, when you need your smartphone to work, have you noticed that it doesn't? There's always some glitch. There's always some problem. And I'm sure we've all experienced this. And what you regard as important may be different from what I regard as important. So let's just say, for example, you are 24 hours away from a flight and you need to log in to the app of the airline so you can check in for your flight. Because if you don't check in, 45 minutes before a domestic flight, they won't let you on the plane? And I think it's longer than that for an international flight. I just had to do this not that long ago. I was flying up to the Bay Area from Southern California, and I was flying on Alaska Airlines, and it was 24 hours ahead of time, and I had to check in for the flight. And I always like to check in over the app because that way I avoid standing in line at the airport. Whenever you show up to the airport and you need to check in, that's when the delayed flight to Seattle has 1,000,001 people waiting in line in front of you. And they're all testy, and they're all anxious, and they're all screaming into their phones at someone. No one's a happy camper. And the last thing you want to do when you're getting ready to go on a flight is to be around that negative energy. So I always like to check in on my app. What happens the first time I try to check in for an Alaska Airlines flight? I am logged out of the app because, and I don't know why they do this, every time they update the apps, they log you out. Well, I have 1,000,001 different passwords, and every company requires you to use a character, use an uppercase, use a number, use a this, use a that. So I don't remember any of them. I rely on the app to let me in by letting me stay logged in so I don't have to log in every single time I open up the app. Yet for whatever reason, and there's a handful of them, these apps update all the time, and every time they update, they log you out. So if you don't remember your login for Alaska Airlines, which I didn't, you have to go through the entire process of figuring out how to set a new password so you can log back in and then check in for your flight. And sometimes, I forget if it was Alaska or a different app where I had this problem recently, you can't even do it from the apps. You have to go on the website on a laptop computer to be able to reset the password so you can log back in on the app. If it's something like checking in for a flight, it's a pain, but it's not as important as casting a ballot. In theory, that is a constitutional right that all of us have who are over the age of 18, and we're not felons. We're United States citizens. We can cast a ballot. In theory, that's something that's very important. Trusting an app to work and not log you out is something I don't know if I'm prepared to do. Here's another potential problem. How often do other people have access to your phone? If you're in a family, people are looking at your photographs all the time. People are helping you out with how to log back into an app because you've been logged out because the app updated. People help you set up new apps on your phone if you're not technologically a whiz. Sometimes you just want to show something to someone. Can you believe this? Look at this on Twitter. Can you believe this person said that? If you have families, frequently, and you see this all the time at restaurants, mom will give the cell phone to a child so the child can look at cartoons and won't scream their head off at the table. And the phone gets passed around at the table, and any number of people have access to the phone. People can cast a ballot either on purpose or by accident if they have access to your phone. You think that's a good idea? Here's another problem. Usually in families or relationships, one person cares more about politics than the others. Generally speaking, that's been my experience. The loudest person is usually the one that has the last say. Whether or not other people in the family go along with it, I don't know. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Typically, if a person is loud and obnoxious and pushy about their politics, you can say whatever it is that you have to say to placate them, but when you go behind the curtain to cast your ballot, it is a secret ballot. It's a private vote. Nobody knows how you vote when you go behind that curtain. If it's through the mail, I guess you can take your ballot and you can go vote in private someplace else. It's still not as good as voting in person in terms of guaranteeing someone 100% privacy, which is very important. Because if the ballot isn't private, you can influence how a person votes. And you may be able to get them to vote against their own wishes if you're aggressive enough. In the old days, and some states I think even still have this, in the old days, they had an option when you voted in person so you could vote a straight party line ticket. What do I mean by that? Well, it's a little bit different than going through your ballot. If you want to vote for all Democrats or all Republicans, you have the option of going through and filling in all the bubbles. Well, it's fine to do that. You just have to physically do it in each individual race. In the old days, what you used to be able to do is go in and say, okay, I'm going to vote a straight Republican ticket. I'm going to vote for every single Republican on the ballot. And they give you your ballot, and you just pull the lever for all the Republicans, and poof, it's automatic. Every Republican candidate on your ballot has your vote. You don't have to go through each individual race. Why is that a problem? It makes it easier. It makes it more convenient. Well, if someone's trying to figure out how you voted, it pretty much tips your hand now, doesn't it? They know you voted all one way or all the other way, and you're not splitting your ticket. You're not voting for some Republicans, some Democrats. You're not leaving some blank, whatever might be your preference. And we got rid of that in California because we didn't want the parties or the unions or the fill in the blank to be able to bully you and to monitor how you vote. Because guess what? Nothing prevents them from standing in the polling location and watching you when you go behind the curtain. And if you're there for 10 seconds, they know you voted the way they wanted you to vote. If you're there for 10 minutes, they know you didn't. And you might be on the outs with them. So the reason we made that illegal was so that the voter had the maximum ability to make sure their wishes are heard on their ballot. The moment you allow third parties to have access to that ballot or to have any kind of tip-off as to how that person is voting is the minute you start influencing how they vote. If the vote is up to the individual, then we need to keep everyone else out of it and let them vote how they want to vote. You want to vote for the Democrat? Vote for the Democrat. You want to vote for the Republican? Vote for the Republican. You want to split your ticket? Split your ticket. Whatever. But if you start giving clues to that person's union or that person's political party or that person's family or that person's fill in the blank, then you start putting pressure on them to vote a certain way. And we shouldn't do that here. You allow people to vote on their phone, guess what? The pushy one in the family is going to say, all right, it's time to vote tonight. Everyone get their phones out. We're all going to do this together. And this is how we're voting. And you put that person who would prefer to have a private ballot in a very difficult position. You're essentially forcing them to have a confrontation with an obnoxious person in their family for them to vote how they want to vote. I understand if you're trying to bully them into voting a certain way why you would want to do this. You're not making it more convenient for that person. You're making this a great big pain in the ass. Maybe that's by design. I don't know. And then you have the issue of hacking. You have the issue of people breaking into someone's phone and voting on their behalf so they can influence the results of the election. If there is anything on planet Earth that should be analog, it's voting. Voting should be on paper, and we should make sure that individuals who are trying to break the law and influence the results of the election can't do that. And the way to do that is to take it offline. Even the electronic machines that we have at the polling places, they're not supposed to be on the internet because then hackers have access to them. And there are some hackers that are more sophisticated than others. If you make it super analog, you take that ability away from them. And we did it with paper ballots for a very long time, and we had no problems with hackers. We had other problems. We had no problems with hackers. There's no reason as to why we can't continue to do that. And by the way, when we voted by paper ballot back in the old days, we also seemed to be able to count them quicker, didn't we? Go back to your childhood and think about the elections and think about how you used to know who won and who lost when you went to bed. And now it takes weeks, if not months, for some of these races. The really, really, really close ones, way back when, sometimes took some time to figure out who won. I remember when Dianne Feinstein ran against Michael Huffington for the United States Senate in 1994. It was a close race. California was a lot more purple back then, and Michael Huffington had a gazillion dollars. So did Dianne Feinstein, but so did Michael Huffington. So you had two well-financed campaigns in what was nationally a Republican year. And in California, you had a Republican incumbent governor running for re-election who ended up winning in a landslide. If there was any year where a Republican had the wind at their back running for a U.S. Senate seat in California, that was it. And as expected, the election was extremely close. So you went to bed that night not knowing who won. And they tried to cure ballots, and they had, I don't know if there was a recount or not, but I know that he did what he thought he had to do to confirm that he lost the race. So it took a little bit of time, but not much. We knew within a couple of days, at least, that Dianne Feinstein had won that race. There was a state Senate seat, I remember this, in the San Fernando Valley, where it was Richard Alarcon. That's 2 mentions today for Richard Alarcon. How wild is that? That name hasn't come up on this program in a million years, and it's come up twice today. But Richard Alarcon was running against a guy by the name of Richard Katz for a state Senate seat. And that race was extremely close. And that one took a very long time to figure out because it was just a handful of votes. Bob Dornan versus Loretta Sanchez. That was another one. I think that was 96 or 98, where that one took forever to count all the ballots. And we were talking about less than 1,000 votes between the two. We were talking about a razor-thin margin. But those were the anomalies. Now it seems like there's elections every single time we cast ballots that are like that. And we seem to be able to count them faster with paper ballots. Part of what you need to do if you want people to participate in the process, if you want people to actually vote, is you need to make sure they have confidence in the voting system. If they think it's a clean and fair election, you will have more participation. The moment you allow people to vote on their phones, guess what happens to confidence in the election? It goes in the toilet. Before everyone started voting by mail, there was one state that used to do it consistently. It was the state of Oregon. Oregon was ahead of everyone else voting by mail. And guess what? When you would poll the populations of each of the states and you would ask them how much confidence they had in their election, Oregon was always at the bottom of the list. If you cast your ballot in person and you put it in the box, you have a larger ability to have confidence that that is a clean and fair election than if you put it in the mail. Now, I vote through the mail, and I receive results from the county registrar and the Secretary of State when they receive and count my ballot. But a lot of people are old school about this. A lot of people like to do it in person, and the reason they like to do it in person is because it gives them confidence in the election. It's the John Phillips Show. It's the John Phillips Show. 800-222-5222 is the telephone number. 1-800-222-5222. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. Coming up next, we're going to check in with former California Governor Gray Davis. Now, I don't know when this happened, but have you noticed that the Christmas season now starts the moment that Halloween is over? It used to be a week or so into December where you started to see all the Christmas decorations go up, and then right after Christmas, they all came down. And then it started to be that after Thanksgiving, the moment Thanksgiving ended, when we kind of sped things up, that's when you started seeing the Christmas decorations. And now that's not the case anymore. If you put your Christmas decorations up after Thanksgiving, you're going to be one of the last ones in the neighborhood to have your home decorated for the holiday. Now, I'm not quite as early as some where the Christmas decorations go up right after Halloween, but mine are going up today, so they will be here for Thanksgiving. All right, we've got one more hour coming up on the John Phillips Show. Don't you go anywhere.